Hi everyone, this is Grandmaster Ben Finegold, and we're here with a sponsored lecture. Mr. Charles Marshall has sponsored this lecture on the Karpov-Kasparov 1985 World Championship match. Now, technically, there were two World Championship matches played in 1985, but one of them started in 84 and ended in 85, and it didn't finish. Frankly, terrible. And for those of you who don't know, I'm guessing like Oliver doesn't know, and probably most of you, in 1984, in October, the World Chess Championship started with Karpov and Kasparov. And I actually was in Moscow in August of 1984, and the grandmasters who were in Moscow that I saw, they thought it was like 50-50. And this was a really crazy match. The one that was before the match we're going to talk about, the setup. Karpov had been world champion for 9 years, 9. And he played Kasparov. Kasparov won every tournament he played in. And unlike today's world champion, Magnus Carlsen, Kasparov won tournaments by 3 points, 4 points, 5 points. And when Kasparov was getting his GM norms, he got his GM norms like halfway through the tournament and would get like 5 points more than the GM norm. So Kasparov was taking the world by storm because of his very aggressive play, his great opening preparation, and his great confidence. Okay, very similar to Fischer, by the way. In 84, the match never ended. It went for 5 months, and it finished in 85. And after 29 games, Karpov was up 5-0 with 24 draws. And the match rules said first to win 6 games, but Karpov never won the 6th game. They drew 1 million games in a row. Kasparov got a win. It was 5-1. And then at the end of the match, games 47 and 48, Kasparov won both of them. So now the score was 5-3. The FIDE president, Florencio Campomanes, he said, this match has gone long enough. This match is canceled, confusing the audience. So the match didn't count. The match was stopped. Okay, that didn't make any sense, but that could be a whole lecture why the match was stopped. Okay, so that finished in February, and then in very late 85, I think it was September. In September 85, they played another match. This match had rules that would make the match end. So the match we're going to talk about this lecture is a 24-game match. If you get 12.5 points, you win. And if the score is 12-12, Karpov retains his title. And if Kasparov wins the match, Karpov gets a rematch. So really favorable to Karpov, the rules. Okay, and so this match is going to end because it's a 24-game limit. It's not endless match, first to win 6 games. Okay, so the first game, which was played in September, which is the game you see on the screen now, Kasparov was white. And the last time they played, these two players, was in the last match, which ended in February, and Kasparov won the last 2 games. So Kasparov's on a roll. Between the matches, between February and September, they played some practice tournaments and matches. Kasparov played 2 matches. He played Hübner, who was top 10 in the world, and Ulf Andersson, who was top 10 in the world, and he beat them both without losing any games. Kasparov played in some big tournament, I think in July, and he won the tournament with 4 wins and 5 draws, no losses. So neither player had lost a game since the last match, and now they're playing again. Now, as is well known at the time, Kasparov is a very interesting player, deep calculation, lots of variations, lots of tactics, very combative, great opening preparation, lots of energy, and Karpov's the opposite. Karpov plays a boring style where he just plays perfectly every move without putting tremendous pressure on his opponent, and after the game goes 30, 40, 50, 60 moves, his opponents make some small mistakes, and Karpov wins. So very contrasting styles. And this is great for us that we get to see the two contrasting styles play each other. Okay, now the first game was very interesting from the opening point of view. and this is Kasparov with white. They played a Nimzo Indian, and the reason it was interesting is Kasparov played knight f3, slightly unusual, and then he played g3, and the funny thing about this is Karpov had never faced this line, okay? And this was an unusual line until this match. After this match, Grandmaster started playing knight f3 and g3. And Karpov, in this position, thought for 30 minutes. And for the first 5 or 6 moves of the game, he took almost an hour because he was like, what is this? And Kasparov had good opening preparation and tried to play openings his opponents didn't know and analyze them deeply. So it's sort of like a Catalan that White's playing and Black's playing an Nimzo Indian, and it's not something that Karpov was used to facing. Okay, so he played very aggressive, knight e4, and it starts off aggressive, but it actually just trades a lot of pieces. The problem with trading all those pieces is the remaining pieces for Black are these. That's not good. He's basically trading his good pieces. Okay, so queen d3, defending his knight and attacking the knight on e4. Queen a5, very aggressive. They traded knights, and you can't take the bishop on c3 because queen takes would be check and winning the rook on a1. So Kasparov played bishop d2. This is all well-known theory. They traded queen b6, threatening the b2 pawn and the d4 pawn. Very similar to a French defense, where you put pressure on these two pawns. Takes, takes. White has a terrible pawn structure, but again, Kasparov doesn't care about that very much. Kasparov cares about activity. Okay, Karpov cares more about pawn structure. And if you look at activity, active, active, active soon, queen side's not very active. So Black has a better pawn structure, but we're sort of late in the game, and Black's only moved his queen. Okay, rook b1, Karpov pins the knight. The problem with taking the pawn on a2, which he didn't do, is after queen d4, threatening g7, and then Black does something about it. Then if White plays queen c3, threatening rook a1, you can obviously see that that queen could get in trouble. That queen's not well placed. So he played queen c3, pinning the knight. Queen d3 is an excellent move, and after making almost all queen moves, Karpov traded queens, which actually helps out White's pawn structure. On the other hand, since Black has no development at all, it would be dangerous to leave the queens on the board. White would have a big initiative, and Karpov thought, well, it's an end game, and my opponent has an isolated pawn and doubled pawns, so that's good for Black, and White has some pressure, but White actually has too much pressure. The rook on b1 is excellent, and this position is already very bad for Black, which is understandable. Black did not expect this opening at all, and Kasparov had been preparing it with his people for a long time. Playing a match is a lot different than playing in a tournament, especially in the instance where you know who you're going to play for quite a long time. And it's different from these guys than it is for you at home, because at you at home, if you're like, oh, I'll play a match with this guy, and I'm like, what openings does he play? And you're like, I don't know. Okay, but at the Grandmaster level, boy, do they know. That's why databases exist, and books and magazines and the internet, because you look at every game your opponent's played, you know what openings they're good at, which ones they're not familiar with, what kind of style they have. So it's really important to get positions you like that your opponent doesn't like. I don't think anybody would like Black here. Black's played so many moves, and none of his pieces have moved. So he's traded off all of his good pieces. Conversely, White has the open file. White's got this bishop coming here. White's got this big pawn center. It's just a really good position for White. And in these kinds of positions, the people who were rooting for Karpov, they were thinking, well, Karpov might get some worse positions, but he's a great defender. So he'll defend these positions where he's worse, and he'll draw those games. And there'll be some games where he just outplays Kasparov. So the Karpov people were pretty confident that he could do well in the match. Okay, so knight a6, attacking the pawn on c5. A lot of people think that's a mistake, that the knight should have gone to c6. d4, obviously. Rook b8, bishop g2, king e7. It's the end game. Usually you don't want a castle, you want your king in the center, because your king's not going to get mated. But if things happen, you want your king to be able to do stuff. Move your king up in the center. Kasparov agrees. Rook d8, knight e4. That looks like a nice juicy square. And when your pawns are all on white squares and your dark squared bishop is gone, which is the case, then your dark squares are weak. Okay. b6, Karpov tries to trade off the pawns. He doubles up on the b file. Okay, and again, they've played some more moves since my last conjecture, and black's pieces are still on the back rank. Terrible position for black, just begging for a draw. Attacking the c pawn, so you can't take the b pawn so easily. He moves out of the pin. The b pawn is still pinned on b6. And okay, here it's just losing a pawn. I mean, this pawn's attacked many times. You can't defend it, you can't move it. So you're just going to lose a pawn. He takes on passant, defends his pawn. He gets a skewer. Karpov plays b5. The bishop's trapped. So you can't play bishop b7. So you got to play b5. Now the rook defends, discovered defense, but you lose a pawn. Rook b8 pins. It's very lucky here Karpov doesn't have to resign because the bishop's still trapped, but rook b8 pins the pawn. So he's very lucky he's not losing right away. And this is a very easy win for white. White's up a pawn. White has the 2-to-1 pawn majority on the queen side, and white has a better king. White's king is on the third rank, black's is on the back rank. So this is a very easy win for white. And just the rest of the game is not very interesting. It's just Kasparov pushing his extra pawns. B pawn's too strong. You can't play rook takes c5 and give him 2 connected pass pawns. You can't move your rook away and let him take a pawn for free, so you got to play f5. All right, and the king walks up. Okay, and here Karpov resigned. Very reasonable resignation. The b6 pawn's way too good. My king is way too good. Here comes rook c7 check or king c6. Completely winning. So now, I was playing a lot of chess at this time. Some of you weren't born yet. I remember this very well. I mean, at this time I was 2200, 2300. I'd already been to Moscow for a chess seminar. And I didn't realize until today, when I did a lot of research for this lecture, that this was actually 3 wins in a row for Kasparov against Karpov. Very unusual. I would say it's never happened before or since. So Kasparov won the last 2 games in February in the match that was canceled, and they haven't played since, and now he won the first game. So Kasparov's looking good, and I would say Kasparov's performance in this game was very Karpov-like. Like slight advantage, clear advantage, won a pawn, won the endgame. That's not the Kasparov I know, and we're going to see the Kasparov that I know, later in the lecture. All right, you guys are pretty quiet. Pretty quiet. Okay, now in game 4, Karpov got revenge. This was a very back and forth match. Okay, so they drew games 2 and 3. In game 2, maybe Kasparov was winning, maybe. Okay, and Karpov's white. And this is my favorite Karpov game of this match. And it's easily one of my 5 favorite Karpov games. Might be my favorite, maybe. And I've shown this game many times. It's a Queen's Gambit, which is strange for Kasparov. Kasparov was a very combative player, but in match play against Karpov, against d4, he chilled out a lot. Against e4, he would often play a combative Sicilian, but against d4, Kasparov didn't mind to make a draw in the match. Okay, anti-Tartakower line, and very boring trading Karpov-like game. Okay, we're just trade everything. Kasparov tried to sack a pawn to get an initiative. Karpov's like, I don't want your pawn. I just want to have a small advantage. Okay, you can have your pawn back. I don't care. Okay, and we have an isolated D pawn, and white's pieces are all out, and he's very solid. Okay, black has the two bishops. Okay, and trading. And this is a very Karpov-like position where if you saw two other grandmasters playing, you would just think this is a boring draw. But, white's slightly better because it's isolated pawn. And knight takes e6, that actually won me a game. I don't know when it was. I think it was 1992 or 1993. No, that's not right. What do I mean? No, that is right. Yeah, in 1992 or 1993, I was white, and my opponent had an isolated pawn, and I did the same thing. I took his bishop, fixing his pawn structure, but then I got the white squares. And I remember doing it because of this game. It's a move I never would have thought of, like, giving black these two center pawns, but his white squares are so weak, and I have a queen, and I have a bishop, and his bishop's not defending. And he just keeps putting pressure on the white squares. So it's sort of a boring game, but black doesn't really have any counterplay. And you can see that eventually black's king is going to get in trouble once the queen and bishop make a battery. Okay, and this e4 move, that was specifically the move that I played in my game after I took on e6, so I could weaken black's pawn structure and still have an attack. Okay, trading is good for white because black wanted counterplay on the queen side, but he doesn't get any. Okay, back to an isolated pawn position. Black can't really do much, and eventually white's going to come in here and infiltrate. Obviously, white doesn't trade queens. Okay, and he finally did it. He finally got his queen and bishop lined up, and some of you might be like, well, that's checkmate. Did Kasparov resign here? Could somebody turn on their mic and tell me how black escapes mate? That way I know your mic's working. I hear noises, but no moves.
There's king to g8.
King to g8 is correct, yeah. You play king g8, queen check, king g8 again. That's right. Always repeat. Good job, Karpov. Then he played bishop f5, which is really interesting. That way when he plays queen g6, his bishop can go to e6 also. So this is no fun for black. Black's only hope is getting this going. But obviously, he's got back rank problems, and he's got these problems. And his main problem is his bishop is terrible. He'd really like to have his bishop on this diagonal and his rook on this file so he could put pressure on f2, but sorry. Did it again. Karpov's so mean. Always repeat.
So does black just want to trade everything and push the passed pawn, or is that just impossible?
Yeah, if he could trade queens, he wouldn't even be worse. Yeah, that'd be fine. Right. Yeah, his king is no good. So he wants to trade whatever he can. Exactly. Although Karpov never lets him trade anything. Karpov's a meanie. Okay, now in this position, it's been obvious that these are the two attacking pieces, and this piece on rook on f1, that's not doing anything. That's just been on f1. Okay, but you can imagine if that rook could get to a good square, all right, then Karpov will be getting somewhere. So he plays g3, making his king safer. Okay, good, king g2. Never can be checked on the back rank. And if somehow Kasparov cheats and gets his bishop here, which is where I would want my bishop, the white king's on g2. He's out of the pin. Okay, and then as Mepex explained, black wants to trade, and Karpov says, Ish don't think so. h4, rook to d1 with the very obvious idea of a rook lift. It's going to look good for white. Okay, and there he goes. And Kasparov tries to run away. Where are you running to? Queen h8, there's nowhere to run. He's got him surrounded. Now that is a terrible bishop. It doesn't help the black king at all. This pawn is blockaded. This king is safe. This king is not safe. This is how Karpov's fans envisioned him winning the match. This kind of game. Slow, maneuvering, boring game where Kasparov is defending. That's not what Kasparov wants. Kasparov wants wild and crazy, long calculation, sacrifice material, attack Karpov's king. That's what Kasparov wants. That's not what happened in this game. This game was very boring. White slowly increased his advantage, and Kasparov had to defend. That's not what he likes to do. And obviously, Black's king is in a lot of trouble. He wants to put the rook on the e-file. So he plays rook f4, play rook e4 check, queen check, check. Just like in the movies, guys, black plays check, then white plays check. Okay, if you ever watch TV or movies, that's the way the games are. Okay, king f7, check, king f8, bishop h7. The threat is queen g8 mate. That's a tough threat. Probably he should stop that. So he has to play rook f7 or queen f7. Queen f7, queen c8's mate. So you got to play rook f7. Queen e8 mate's the threat. Queen e5. And now Kasparov resigned because if it's white's move, white plays queen b8. And it doesn't really matter what you do. Bishop g6 is also winning. Queen c5 is winning. So the king is finally trapped, and Kasparov resigned. That game, I like to call the White Square Symphony. On the internet, it's called the White Key Symphony. You have to like symphonies. Otherwise, you don't like the game so much. Yeah. And that was game 4. So now Karpov tied the match. And honestly, going back to the last match, Karpov hasn't won a game in a long time. Karpov won game 29, and then they played about 20 games in a row in the last match, and they played 3 games here. So the last 23 games, Karpov hasn't beaten Kasparov. And now he did. Okay? So the match is now 1-1 with, some draws. That was game 4 of the match. Okay. Now game 5 of the match, Karpov seizes the initiative. And this game is very instructive because it's a Ruy Lopez, and that's the kind of opening Karpov likes. And there were a lot of games, not against Kasparov, where Karpov's white and he's just beating everybody. In the 1970s, the 1980s, if you look at Karpov's best games, a lot of them, Karpov is white and a Ruy Lopez. Now, when he played Kasparov, if it was a Ruy Lopez, then Karpov was black. Okay, and Kasparov was always trying to attack, and Kasparov was defending great, and those were great games. Okay, so we have a Ruy Lopez. This is game 5 of the match. And he played the Zaitsev variation, which makes a lot of sense because Karpov was working with Zaitsev. So, play the Zaitsev variation. Now, the Zaitsev variation, this is the main position of the Ruy Lopez. In this position, black has like 5 moves that are theory. You can play bishop e6, knight a5, knight b8, bishop e7, h6. Then there's the Zaitsev, which is to play rook e8. And when Smyslov was black in the Ruy Lopez in the 50s and 60s, Smyslov played h6, the Smyslov variation, and that stops knight g5. And Zaitsev said, no, you don't have to stop knight g5. No, just go here. Now, in the Ruy Lopez, white likes to play knight d2, knight f1, knight g3. And Zaitsev says, you know what? Let's stop him from doing that. We'll play rook e8, and we'll play bishop f8. Now, you can't play knight f1 because your e-pawn's not defended. If you play knight f1, I'll take, and I got two guys on your e-pawn. You got one guy defending it. And this was an improvement over the Smyslov variation. Smyslov played the same way, but Smyslov played h6, so that lost the tempo, and white put his knight there. Okay, Karpov's obviously going to play the Zaitsev variation because Zaitsev is one of his coaches. So, okay, so he plays a4, he plays on the other side of the board, and they trade everything, and eventually Kasparov locks the center and plays d5. And a lot of Rui Lopez's, eventually black plays c5 and white plays d5, locking the center. When white plays d5 first, before black plays c5, now black doesn't have to play c5, black can hammer the center with c6. Bam. That's better for black than if the pawn was on c5 and the bishop is just buried on a8 and can't ever move. c6, we're attacking that center. We got this guy, this guy, this guy, and later some other guys might attack d5. So Kasparov kicks the knight, defends his pawn on d5, and they do some trades. And Kasparov plays the very aggressive c5. He likes that Spanish bishop. He wants to attack. Knight d8, Karpov defends f7, and his knight can go to e6. And he unblocks his bishop. Great play by Karpov. Okay, they trade, and material still equal. Knight d7 wants the bishop. Kasparov says, nope, you can't have it. Attacks the bishop again. Knight b3, by the way, attacks the knight. So knight c5. Okay, and in the game analysis, Kasparov was considered to have played two bad moves this game that cost him the game. The first one is bishop a1. That's considered quite bad. That doesn't really take into account that his e-pawn is attacked. Okay, but Kasparov didn't like this pin, so he played bishop a1. That doesn't make a lot of sense because Kasparov played bishop b2 like 4 moves ago, then bishop a1, just losing time. So he's down a pawn. Okay, and then he has one last chance in the game. He's down a pawn for nothing. Queen e2, knight e6, knight d6, takes. Okay. And I heard some loud noise. That was good. Okay, and here, in this position, he played queen g4, rook e8. And instead of queen g4, Kasparov claimed he could have drawn the game by playing a really crazy move. One that I would probably never consider. Does anybody here see a crazy move that actually works? It's a crazy move. What is it? Knight e6 is correct. Obviously, you don't want to, get in trouble here. So you go takes, here, takes. You can't take with the knight because your knight's defending your bishop. You have to take with the queen. Okay. Now I play bishop e5. You can't let me take your knight because you'll lose your bishop. So you have to move your bishop. Okay. And I think this was the suggested move. That way, in this position, there's no queen mate here. And then queen takes pawn. This looks like a draw. All the pawns are on the same side. Probably a draw. I'll take black as 2 bishops, but I'm not sure how black wins this. Okay, so knight e6 was a crazy move, but it's probably the right move. Okay, now this end of the game is very unsatisfying for me. I don't know if you guys will agree. I was not satisfied. Nothing happened. And I didn't tell you this before because I forgot. The time control, which would really confuse Archer, but Karen's going to start clapping. If you hear clapping, it's probably Karen. And even if her mic is off, she's about 50 feet away. You might still hear her clapping. The time control is 40 moves in 2.5 hours. Okay, that's the way it used to be. Those were the golden age for Karen, but Karen didn't play chess then. Okay, and when 40 moves was made or the 5 hours was up, they would adjourn the game and play the rest of the game later, which they don't do now. And at the end of this game, which is pretty soon, knight d3. Okay, this is the point of the game where they adjourned. They played for 5 hours. This was move 42, I think. And the game ended, and they play the game later. Okay, and Kasparov resigned before they resumed the game. Resigning would never occur to me, ever. Don't ever resign. Don't do what Kasparov did. Okay, so Kasparov said, I'm lost. My opponent has a passed pawn. It's just technique. I'm still shocked by this. If you put it on engines say black is up somewhere between 1.1 and 1.7. I mean, I can't imagine anybody resigning this position. So I'm baffled. Okay. So the game ended here. They didn't resume the adjournment. Karpov just won. Kasparov said, I resign. And black's up a pawn. So I would never resign or consider resigning. And I still think it's ridiculous. So, all right. So now Karpov won 2 games in a row, games 4 and game 5. He's in the lead at this point. Okay. Now the next game is a famous game, and I'm not going to show you the whole game because the whole game is really boring. I'm going to show you the exciting part. Also, this is a 45-minute lecture. So, all right. This position's obviously drawn. It's all symmetrical. Nobody should lose this position at this level. Karpov and Kasparov, pretty good players. Okay, pawn structure's the same, pieces are the same. There's no threats. Okay, Karpov decided to double his rooks, and he played rook to d7. Although I guess it was Kasparov's move, rook d1, rook d7. Okay, he wants to play rook to d8, and then they're going to trade everything on the d file. Trade those rooks, draw. Kasparov played queen g4, attacking the rook, and he claimed in interviews later he knew Karpov was going to blunder here. I don't know. Okay, the engines say rook d6 or rook d8 is equal position. But Karpov didn't see any danger, and he played a famous blunder. And a lot of times when the game is completely equal, you relax. And this is a Karpov kind of position. Kasparov doesn't really have any attack. Karpov traded everything. It's a boring position. So Karpov was probably really relaxed. Like, this is my kind of position. This is great. And he played rook c to d8. Famous blunder. And the game ended very quickly. Does anybody remember, did anybody see this before? Can you figure out the winning move that Kasparov made?
Is it rook e6?
Rook e6? That's crazy like Fox News. Wow. It is not rook e6. Although I like rook e6. Man, rook e6 is exciting. Yeah. I think that doesn't work. But it might. Rook e6.
I played rook f7 there.
Rook e6, what are you doing? Oh, so after rook e6, if you take with the bishop, my brother's suggesting rook f7. Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, white needs some more pieces. If this was Bughouse, white would be doing well, I think.
Wait, rook takes d8 and then queen c4 though?
Rook takes d8, knight takes d8.
Right.
Well,
And queen c4.
your bishop's hanging on e6,
Bishop's
and
dead,
you're down a rook. Like, if your bishop wasn't hanging, you're still down a rook. Yeah.
What about back in the original position?
Now you're talking.
Rook to e8 check.
You could play rook to e8 check. Somehow I should be okay there. I'm not sure if it's king h7 or taking it. It might just be king h7.
Is it queen takes d7?
It is queen takes d7, although rook e8 does look good. King h7, bishop e4 should win. So you have to take. take. We'll look at this move first, then the move that was played. Now what do? We do here? Is that good enough?
Yeah, or queen e7.
Queen e7, I don't know about that. Queen e7, bishop takes c6. Rook e7 looks good enough. I think that's fine. Right, in the game, Kasparov did play the move suggested by Oliver. Queen takes d7. Now the game's over. Truth hurts. Karpov took, check, check, and then he resigned. Obviously, he has to play g6, takes, and you're getting crushed over here. Frankly, terrible. The problem is your queen isn't defending your knight in case of bishop takes because rook f7's mate. Now, if you want to save your bishop, this is the only square. Then I take. You can't take my bishop because you get mated. So, yeah, you're just down a lot of material. So after bishop e4 check, he resigned. He just didn't see queen takes rook. And then the game's over. The engine says like +7. So
Seems like an odd thing to miss.
that's correct. Yep. And Kasparov said he felt Karpov would miss it. All right, that's old school trash talking. They don't trash talk like that now. All right, so that was a game Kasparov won. That's why he's the world champion. Okay, got 2 games left. Now, this is a very famous game, and what I know from my own, I'm a grandmaster too. I wasn't then, but years after this game, people were wondering, what's the refutation of this sacrifice? It's a Sicilian. This variation's not too common nowadays. And now Kasparov, twice in the match, played the move d5, pawn sacrifice. First game he played it was a draw. Then he played it again, and this is a famous win that he had, very famous. And many years later, Karpov was playing John van der Wiel, the Dutch grandmaster. And they got this position. And Karpov said, "Excuse me while I whip this out." And he played the novelty he'd been waiting to play, and White's close to winning. And it turns out he didn't win the game, which is funny. And since the van der Wiel game, nobody plays this pawn sec anymore. Now, what's funny is Kasparov said in this particular game, he had it analyzed all the way to move 20 or 21. But in this position, his team must have missed this move. Now, Karpov castled, but if this game was played today, Karpov would play the refutation, which is bishop e3. And now nobody plays this with black anymore. If you take the bishop, it looks like White's going to have the worst pawn structure ever and lose his d-pawn, but we play a Zwischenzug. Unless there's a German person listening, then they're like, what are you talking about? You play queen a4 check. Bishop d7, queen takes, black can't castle, black's bishop is attacked, this pawn is attacked, White's up a pawn. So the engine says this is like 0.7 or 0.8 for White. And so after the van der Wiel game, nobody played this for black anymore. This is terrible. But for some reason, neither team knew the move bishop e3. And then after the match ended, or maybe after this game, Karpov's team found bishop e3. And then after that, nobody played this with black anymore. Okay, but he castled. And this was all Kasparov's preparation. Queen d2, b5. And so White's a pawn up, but black's pieces are super active, and White's knight on a3 is terrible. Terrible knight. So great bishop, great rook, great knight, and then terrible. So this is a pawn sacrifice by Kasparov with good compensation. Knight gets to d3, always retreat. And he's just really pushing him back. Yeah, this knight on d3 is just totally dominant. These rooks just can't move. Okay, and g5 is a famous move because it really shows White's helplessness. Black is just going to advance, and then, whoa, not that. And then there's nothing White can do about it. Black just keeps going more and more forward, and White is like, well, stop that. White's a pawn up, but that pawn is of little consequence. It's not going to queen. It's blocking the bishop. It's already blockaded. And black's rooks are much better than white's rooks. And this knight is crazy good. So just terrible position for white.
Why wouldn't white just play bishop e2 and get the knight out of there? Would black sack the exchange and be worse?
Always sack the exchange. No, but after bishop e2, you're giving away these two squares. You could get in trouble doing that. I'm not saying I wouldn't do that. Like, you got to play passively and get that knight out of there. But I guess after knight f4, then the rook is threatening to go to c2. And then you're giving away knight e4. I mean, the bishop is really good here defending this. So if you're really worried about the knight and you don't care about that, then yeah, bishop e2, getting the knight out, but you're giving something else away. And if the knight goes to f4, that attacks the bishop, and this rook can go to c2, and you can see that white's position is not very good. He traded pieces. Yes.
What about knight to b2 to attack the knight?
Knight to b2, that's the kind of move I would play. Again, I'm sort of worried about knight takes b2 and rook c2.
Oh, rook c2.
Yeah, also the knight could just move to f4, and maybe knight f4 is better, because then rook c2 is pretty annoying. Yeah.
Yeah.
You guys actually have pretty reasonable defenses. Your defenses might be better than Karpov's. But he traded pieces. If you trade a lot of pieces, you won't get in trouble. g3 stops knight f4, so now knight b2 might be better. Stops knight b2. Yeah, white just can't move. He moved his queen so his knight could go to d2. Knights are both trapped. And yeah, I mean, white just can't do anything. Never play f3. And famous finish. Always finish famously. See how the queen's attacked 6 ways from Sunday? Takes. Rook c1 is just amazing Kasparov calculation. If you play rook takes queen, you lose all your pieces. I hate when I lose all my pieces. This is funny. He should have done this because it's funny. Now you got to save this. You got to save this. Good luck. All right, then this. Yeah. So he played knight b2 finally, and resigns because mate's coming on f1. For example, knight f1 and mate. And as my students would say, not only is it mate, but it's a fork. So these aren't the kind of games you see Karpov losing, where he just gets pushed back, especially when he's white. That's the kind of player Kasparov was. That's a very famous game because Kasparov was black, sacrificed a pawn in the opening, and just ran over Karpov. That wasn't a good game for Karpov. Okay, now the last game of the match, I have to explain the situation. Kasparov is up 12-11. So if Kasparov draws or wins, he's the world champion. If Karpov wins, he's the world champion because the match is a tie and he wins on a tie. That was the rules. And Karpov's white, so you couldn't ask for a better situation. And Kasparov, instead of playing what people would play today, the Petrov and the Berlin, then the Berlin and the Petrov, then the Berlin and the Berlin, he played the Sicilian. Okay, that's what Kasparov played. And normally, Karpov would play solid and slow, but he had to win. And somebody on the internet points it out in the Bishop E2 Najdorf, says Karpov's had this position 41 times. And this was the only game he ever lost. Man, the truth hurts. Okay, so they play. Now Karpov, he was like, I got to win this game. If I draw, I lose the match. So Karpov played super aggressive. And this is all theory. And in this position, G4, not very Karpov-like. But Karpov has to win. So no time for boring play. Bishop c8, always retreat. The knight's going to go to d7, and the bishop's going to go to b7. Black's improving his position. Always play bishop f8. Bishop c1. And eventually, Karpov plays super aggressively. He just throws everything at Kasparov. Okay, he's really trying to win the game and get a big attack. Bishop e3. Puts his king back on g1 because he's Karpov. Kasparov is waiting for f5. Kasparov's like, come on, play f5. If you play f5, now you can see why Kasparov put his rooks here. He's going to play e takes f5 and dominate the e file, and he's going to open up his bishop too. And if Karpov doesn't play f5, what does he do? So Kasparov says, the only thing you can do is play f5, so I'm going to be ready for that. You can't play h4, h5, your rook's on h3, and I'm going to play solid. My knight's over here keeping an eye on c2. Do your worst. And finally, Kasparov plays f5, getting some counterplay of his own. The knight wants to go to g4, rook g3. He takes a pawn. Karpov's up a pawn. But Karpov winning a pawn over here doesn't matter much. Karpov's been pushing his pawns over here and putting his pieces here. He's trying to mate his opponent. If he doesn't, then White's king is going to get open eventually. The f-pawn is very weak on this half-open file, as you can see. Obviously, Karpov can't repeat and draw. Karpov has to win, so he can't go rook g3, knight h5 and repeat, so he has to go here. Sacrifices another pawn. So this is why, although personally I'm not a big Kasparov fan of the person Kasparov, I'm a really big fan of his chess because he needed to draw this game to win the match, and look at the way he's playing. Plays the Sicilian, plays f5, plays g5, sacrificing pawns because he thinks that's the right way to play. He thinks that's the best move. Not the move that leads to a draw, but the move that leads to the best result. Now Karpov's up 2 pawns. Knight g4, threatening everything. Double attack. Kasparov has the 2 bishops. Kasparov gets one of his pawns back. Bishop a8. Now if they trade queens, Black has devastating play down the b file, and White's pieces are sort of scattered over the board. Black has the 2 bishops that are really strong in the center, controlling the center. Black has the open f file. Black will have the open b file. So Karpov doesn't want to trade queens, although what's he going to do? The queen can't retreat down the diagonal. Those squares are protected. Can't go there. So he takes a pawn. He's up 2 pawns again. Rook b7, a skewer. Obviously the players are in time trouble now. Queen takes a6. Kasparov's up a piece, but Karpov has a lot of pawns. Rook takes e6. Karpov has a lot of pawns. That's a lot of pawns. Rook takes b2, not as many pawns as it was. Queen c4, threatening rook takes rook, checkmate. If this game was played on the internet, you have to watch out for a mouse slip. But since it was 1985, it wasn't played on the internet. King h8, getting out of the pin there. e5, queen a7 check, probably missed by Karpov. Bishop takes check. Knight d4, discovered check. And Karpov resigned. I'm sure knight e3 check also wins, but I think he wants to take this rook. That way there's no rook takes rook or any possible attack. So after knight d4 check, Karpov resigned. Kasparov wins the match 13-11. And for the first time since I had any kind of normal thought in my head, Karpov wasn't the world champion, which was very strange for me because I started playing chess in like 1976, and I was 5 years old, 6 years old, 7 years old, and all I knew was Karpov was the world champion. That's all I knew. And then one day, Karpov wasn't the world champion. I'm like, well, he's always the world champion. How can somebody else be the world champion? It was weird. I was 2,300, and all of a sudden somebody else was the world champion. And this was a fantastic game because you could imagine the nerves the players had, especially Kasparov. He's never been a world champion before, and he's 22 years old, and Karpov was 34 years old. 34 years old was pretty reasonable in the 70s and 80s. Nowadays, that's considered pretty old. But back then, that was like a normal age of a world champion. And Kasparov at 22, now that's a young world champion. And he's already played a world championship match that was stopped. So you can see how strong Kasparov was. And that was a brilliant attacking game. Both sides were attacking. All results were possible. And Kasparov won and became world champion by winning with black in a very sharp, complicated game. That's what you want to see. I mean, both players gave it their all, and Kasparov became the deserving champion, which was, at the time for me, just amazing. And the contrast of styles, you got to see the technician, the game Karpov won, and the Queen's Gambit I showed you. Then we saw the tactical ingenuity, Kasparov winning games with black, which you don't see in world championships very often, especially now. Man, you never see it now. In fact, now you don't see anybody ever win with either color. So that was a great match, and they played a lot of great matches, but that's the match that sort of changed the tide, and then Kasparov ruled the chess world for quite a long time. This is Grandmaster Ben Finegold for the Chess Club and Scholastic Center. We want to thank again Charles Marshall for sponsoring this lecture, as well as all of our live viewers. And for you guys at YouTube, make sure you like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye, everybody.